Good evening and welcome to our midweek Bible study here at the Fulton Church of Christ. We appreciate you joining us here for our virtual service this afternoon. Tonight we'll be talking about Leviticus chapter 4. Leviticus chapter 4 is where we'll begin, so if you want to go ahead and turn your Bibles there to Leviticus 4, please do so. Before we do that, we do have a few announcements to make. This Sunday, September the 12th, we will return to in-person worship. We will return to our in-person. We will have virtual still available, but we will return to in-person. This Sunday, we will have a 10 a.m. service only. We will have a 10 a.m. worship, no Bible class. That is open for everyone to come to, but the elders have asked when you come, make sure you do as we did before earlier when we return to sit in the marked pews, the pews with the stickers on them. Please sit in those. And I also have asked that if you feel unwell or you are sick, run a fever, please do not come. Stay home and watch online. If you don't feel comfortable getting out in the crowd, stay at home and watch us online still. Also, if you have been exposed to anyone with COVID, they've asked that you to please stay home, and this is to limit our exposure and limit spreading any of the virus to anyone here. So as I say, this Sunday, September the 12th, we will return to in-person, but it will be a 10 a.m. worship only. We are doing that because the 1st of September we are starting new classes, and some of our teachers have not been able to get their material yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to start our services on September the 12th, but on September the 19th, that is the Sunday after that, 2 Sundays from tonight, we will begin our regular worship service with Bible class. So if you are one of those who are designated to teach Bible classes, please make sure you get with us on Sunday or sometime between now and Sunday so that you can have your material. Next Wednesday night, we'll also return to in-person as well. Again, we will stream all of our Wednesday night services except for our singing nights. So those are just some heads up of what's going on. So let me again repeat, and I'll repeat at the end. This Sunday, September the 12th, we will have a 10 a.m. worship service only. Then on Sunday, September the 19th, we will go back to our regular 9:30 Bible class, 10:15 morning service. And again, all these are streamed online, and then we'll also have our Wednesday night at 7 p.m. And for the time being, we will continue to do FBI virtual. We'll put out those lessons every week, every Tuesday for you to watch at your convenience. So just a reminder, just to let everyone know what the plan is. And again, we'll make some repeated announcements about this, make another one tonight at the end of this lesson. Then probably also we'll send out a message through our Facebook and text messages to let everyone know what our plan is and what the goal is as we progress throughout the next few weeks. But for tonight, we're going to get into our lesson. If you've got your Bibles, as I said earlier, turn to Leviticus chapter 4. Leviticus chapter 4, beginning in verse 1, we're going to see the chapter 4 of Leviticus all the way through chapter 5, verse 16, is going to be all about, or to 5:14, is going to be about sin offerings. Now, tonight, we're only going to look at chapter 4. Then our next class time, we're going to look at Leviticus 5 and look at that whole section. But Leviticus 5 is broken in half. It's going to be about the sin offering, but then also about the guilt offering. And so we're going to look in chapter 4 for tonight of the sin offering, of what is to be offered. You notice this is a division, and this is something that we have seen throughout the book of Leviticus. Numbers will do it too, where we see chapter 4, verse 1, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying. This is again to show who these statements come from, who this law is from. And we're going to see this law is not from Moses, but from God, that God spoke to Moses, and Moses was the mouthpiece. And so Moses is going to speak, and he tells verse 2, speak to the people of Israel, saying, if anyone sins unintentionally in any of the law of the Lord's commands about the things not to be done, and does any one of them. And so he says this is for those who have committed a sin. Now notice this, these sins are going to be talked about in detail here as we talk about unintentional sins. These were the sins that were done unintentionally. What does it mean to be done unintentionally or be done through ignorance? These were sins that at the time of the doing, the time the person did this, he did not know it was a sin. He didn't know it was wrong. He didn't know it violated God's command. And so what has happened is, and this is a breakdown, is that there is someone who sins, who breaks God's law, doesn't know that what he's doing breaks God's law. Therefore, he comes to God and asks for forgiveness. And in asking for forgiveness, he had to offer these offerings. So we're going to talk about 4 different offerings talked about in this chapter. There's going to be the offering for the priest, the offering for the nation, the offering for a leader, and then finally the offering for a member or a common person. Now what's going to happen is that these people are going to come before God and they're going to bring an offering. They're going to bring an offering to God. There are going to be various things they're going to offer. Some are going to offer a bull, some are going to offer a goat, some will offer a sheep, and they're going to bring these offerings before God. And these offerings were to be burned. The fat was to be burned. Then some of the rest of the body was to be left for other things. Some assume, and I think rightfully so, that some of these offerings were to be eaten, not by the person offering this, but by the priest. And so this is what we're going to see as we go through here. And you're going to see that the skin of the offering is going to be retained by the priest. The carcass of an offering and the refuse of that offering is going to be taken outside the camp to be burned. And so there's going to be a part that's offered to God. There's going to be a part that's taken outside the camp to burn. Now that's for part of these offerings. Part of these offerings where the body, the remain part, the meat part was not said to do this. So this is what gave to what we said a minute ago, that some of these offerings had a part that belonged to the priest. And so what these would do is these offerings, the sin offering, signified the acknowledgement of sin or guilt before God and the need for his help. These sin offerings are very key because they were given by the people as a way of acknowledging they had done wrong, acknowledging they had sinned, acknowledging they had failed, and therefore they needed God's help, they needed God's forgiveness. And this is what this sin is going to do for, or this sacrifice is going to do for us. As I said, there's going to be 4 different groups that are talked about here. Now, and we're going to start with this first one. We're going to read the verses, then we're going to look at what our PowerPoint says about this. Start with me in verse 3. If it is the anointed priest who sins, thus bringing guilt on the people, then he shall offer for the sin that he has committed a bull from the herd without blemish to the Lord for a sin offering. He shall bring the bull into the entrance of the tent of the meeting before the Lord, and lay his hand on the head of the bull, and kill the bull before the Lord. And the anointed priest shall take some of the blood of the bull and bring it into the tent of the meeting. And the priest shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle part of the blood 7 times before the Lord in front of the veil of the sanctuary. And the priest shall put some of the blood on the horns of the altar of fragrant incense before the Lord, that is in the tent of meeting. And all the rest of the blood of the bull he shall pour out at the base of the altar of burnt offerings, that is, at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And all the fat of the bull, the sin offering, he shall remove from it the fat that covers the entrails, and all the fat that is on the entrails, and the 2 kidneys with its fat that is on them, and the loins, and the long lobe of the liver, that he shall remove with the kidneys. Just as these were taken from the ox of the sacrifice of the peace offering, and the priest shall burn them on the altar of burnt offerings. But the skin of the bull and all the flesh, with its head, its legs, its entrails, and its dung, all the rest of the bull he shall carry outside the camp to a clean place, to the ash heap, and shall burn it up on the fire of wood. On the ash heap it shall be burned up. So what we see here first is the idea of a priest. If an anointed priest, this is verse 3. The idea here, this would either be a priest who is currently serving, or it could be the priest who has served in the power, or who is a high priest, It could be either one. This sin is done by this priest. Now notice what happens with this sin, the priest sin. In these described, it's interesting, he begins with the priest, but he begins with the priest for a reason. Because you notice verse 3, if it's the anointed priest who sins, he brings guilt on the people. Now notice it's not just all of the guilt on himself, but he brings guilt on the people because he is the mediator. The priests were the in-between between God and man. And so this is why the priest has to be the first talked about. And also the priest is one that had one of the most expensive offerings in this chapter, even given in this entire chapter of our book of Leviticus. And that is to offer the bull. The bull was not a cheap offering. It was not a cheap animal to buy. And so to offer the bull meant a very expensive sacrifice. And so what the priest would have to do is he would have to come And he would bring the bull in verse 3, or verse 4. He's going to bring the bull to the entrance of the tent of meeting before the Lord. And then he knows that he's going to take his head, and he shall take his hand, and lay it on the head of the bull. He's going to lay his hand on the head of this bull. And what he basically does is he acknowledges that this bull is about to suffer what he should be suffering. This bull is going to take the consequences of the sin of this man upon itself that is offered in this thing. And so this is the idea of these sacrifices. And this is the idea that we see in all these sacrifices for the sin offering, is they have to put their hand on the head of the animal, signifying that the life of this animal is about to be killed. This animal is about to be lost because of their sin, because of their guilt. And so he acknowledges that. Then they're going to slaughter the animal again at the front of the tent. They're going to kill the bull. They're going to slit its throat. And as they slit its throat, they're going to catch all of its blood, as they've done the other sacrifices we've talked about. He'll talk about earlier the peace offering is very similar to this. But what is interesting about this priest is that the priest, once he captures the blood, he takes some of the blood inside the tabernacle. And he goes inside that tabernacle, he dips his finger in, and it says 7 times he dips, he sprinkles, he flings blood on the veil. Now he springs blood on the veil that separates the holy place from the most holy place. He doesn't go into the holy place, but he goes to where the most holy place is, where that veil is dividing the two, where the ark is behind that. He sprinkles blood on this veil. And he does this 7 times. Then after he does that, he takes blood and he puts it on the horns of the altar. Now, this has been the first time we've seen this in this chapter, in these chapters, is this is not the altar of burnt offering that's outside the tent of meeting, the tabernacle. This is the altar that's inside. This is the incense. Now, this is that little incense altar that's inside with the table of showbread. And he takes some of the blood and he puts it on all 4 horns, all 4 corners. Then after he takes that blood and does that with the blood, then he takes it outside to the altar of burnt offerings that's out in the courtyard that's in front of the tent of meeting, and he pours all the blood out at the base of that. And then after he has poured all the blood out, then he will continue to, then he begins to proceed to sacrifice the animal, burning it up. Now, what he does is he basically takes the animal, he takes those fatty portions, again, we've talked about that before, these fatty organs, the fat that surrounds these organs, and he goes and he puts them on this burnt offering. And when he puts them on the altar of burnt offering, he burns them up completely. And this is an offering to God. Then he takes the rest of the animal. You notice this is what's unique about this one in verse 4, about verse 11 and following. He's going to take the skin and all the parts of the animal, the leftover, and he's going to take it outside the tent, outside the camp to a clean place. And the idea here is this is a place they would take the ashes and dump them. And what he's going to do is he's going to take this bull and all of its pieces, everything that's not offered to God, and he's going to burn it. He's going to destroy it and turn it into ashes there. And thus he's going to acknowledge his sin before God. And he's also going to acknowledge he's not going to get any benefit from this. Because you notice we talk about this later. We're going to see later in the leader's offering and the common people's offering, there's this wiggle room. And I say wiggle room because it's not specified. There's some wondering if the priest may have eaten the meat that was offered at those times. And we'll talk about that when we get there. But I want to bring this up here because in this sacrifice, the animal was completely destroyed. The priest got no benefit from his own sin offering. And that's very key, meaning that there was no way this priest could offer this bull up and then he still have the meat to eat from this bull, because then it wouldn't be a real full sacrifice to God. And so God required that the priest completely burn this bull up. And so this is the top of the rung of the priest. And this is the top one. God says if this guy sins and he's bringing sin upon the people, this is what he's got to do. He's going to bring a young bull and he's going to do these things with it. The next group talked about if they sin is the congregation, if the nation sins. And again, we pick back up in verse 13. It says, if the whole congregation of Israel sins unintentionally, and the thing is hidden from the eyes of the assembly, and they do any one of the things that the Lord one of the things that by the Lord's commandments ought not to be done, and they realize their guilt. When the sin which they have committed becomes known, the assembly shall offer a bull from the herd for a sin offering, and bring it in front of the tent of meeting. And the elders of the congregation shall lay their hands on the head of the bull before the Lord, and the bull shall be killed before the Lord. Then the anointed priest shall bring some of the blood of the bull into the tent of meeting. And the priest shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle it 7 times before the Lord and in front of the veil. And he shall put some of the blood on the horns of the altar that is in the tent of meeting before the Lord. And the rest of the blood he shall pour out at the base of the altar of burnt offerings, that is, at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And all of its fat he shall take from it and burn on the altar. Thus shall he do with the bull, as he did with the bull of the sin offering. So shall he do with this, and the priest shall make atonement for them, and they shall be forgiven. And he shall carry the bull outside the camp and burn it up as he burned the first bull. It is a sin offering for the assembly. So notice the second one is the second thing that's to be offered is to be the bull. Again, this is for the nation. If the nation of Israel sins unintentionally, again, this is the idea of unintentional or sin of ignorance. What this basically means is that if, and this is an interesting thing we see in the Old Testament, is that if a man was in a position where he sinned, knowing something was a sin, and he did it anyway, in defiance to God, there was no offering. But if the nation of Israel sinned by ignorance, by weakness, by not knowing better, and they do this, and nobody realizes it's a sin until later, this is what they're going to do. And so what we see here is that sin is not just individual level. It can also be on a group level. The entire nation of Israel here is defined as being sinful. What did the nation do? And again, we could debate about what these different things they did, but this is the idea that the nation has sinned against God. And so what do? They bring the bull to the altar. Again, notice their offering was a bull. They had to offer the most expensive offering that was required of God. They bring it to the tent of meeting. The elders lay their hands on the bull. They transfer their sin. They put the responsibility of their sins on this bull for its life that's about to be taken. They kill the bull. They take the blood. Again, and notice they go into the tabernacle. They go into that veil that separates the holy place from the most holy place. And again, he sprinkles that veil 7 times. Then he takes it to the altar of incense and puts the blood on the horns of the altar of incense. Then again, just like the priest, he takes it out to the altar of burnt offering. That's outside the tent, and he pours the blood at the base of that. Then he takes the fat. He burns the fat up as he did earlier. And then, same as with the priest, notice he takes the rest of the animal, and he takes it outside the tent, or outside the camp, outside the town, and he burns it. And so this is the second thing. If the nation of Israel sins against God, this is what they're going to do. But notice in both of these accounts so far, the animal that is sacrificed is to be taken outside whatever's left remain that's not offered to God, is to be taken outside the camp, outside away from everybody, and devoured and burned, where no one can use it. Again, this is so the priests do not benefit from this kind of sin. Because again, if the nation sins, then that means the priests are right there in that mix too. And so the priests are part of this nation that has sinned against God. Therefore, they're not to benefit from the sacrifices for their own sins. Now, we get to the next offering, and this is where we begin to see a little different. The third offering that is discussed begins in verse 22 and goes through verse 25. Or 26. It says, when a leader sins, doing unintentionally any of all the things, or any one of all the things that by the commandments of the Lord commandments of the Lord his God ought not to be done, and realizes guilt, or the sin which he has committed is made known to him, he shall bring his offering, a goat, a male without blemish. And he shall lay his hand on the head of the goat and kill it in the place where they kill the burnt offering before the Lord. It is a sin offering. Then the priest shall take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger and put it on the horns of the altar of the burnt offerings, and pour out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar of burnt offerings. And all of its fat he shall burn on the altar like the fat of the sacrifice of peace offerings. So the priest shall make atonement for him for his sin, and he shall be forgiven. So notice the next one brought in here is the ruler. If a ruler sins, now the idea of a ruler here is a ruler, a chief, an elder. This would later apply to the king, but this is someone who has a position of authority. And what the idea is that this is someone that the people looked up to. This ruler is one who's responsible for a godly walk before his people. He is to be a godly example. Now imagine that for a minute. How great of a thing that is, and not think about this in a church setting, but in a national setting, in a country setting, to have men who stand up and they demonstrate what it means to walk before God and to be held accountable for that. And so they're held accountable for this. And notice again, he sins unintentionally. It means a sin, not that he said, I'm going to defiantly do this before God. But he commits a sin that's not right and that's against God's law. And either later he finds out it's against God's law, or someone comes up to him and says, hey, you know what you did was unlawful. It was sinful. This is what you ought to do. Now notice this leader, and again, I think this again points not necessarily to a king, because the king would have had more money for this, but the ruler of the people, or a chief person of the people, is to bring a goat. Now again, notice the bull. We went from the bull, from the priest and the assembly, to a goat. And not just a goat, but a male goat. A male goat is just a little bit below a bull in how much it costs. It's not as expensive, but it's in that mid-range. And so he brings a male goat before the altar. And when he brings a goat before the tent, notice again, he slits its throat. He drains the blood. The priest takes the blood. But notice what the priest does here. The priest takes the blood, but he doesn't take it inside the tabernacle. Instead, he brings it to the altar of burnt offerings that's on the outside. And as he brings it to that altar, he takes his finger, he dips it in, and he takes blood, and he puts blood on all four posts, all four corners of this tent, this big altar, and then he pours the blood out at the base of this altar. And then again, notice that when he does this, it says that when he has done this, he makes atonement for his sin. So by this act, then the sin is forgiven. The atonement happens. And remember that atonement means to be at one with God, means to be made right. And so this is what happens. And this is where the leeway comes in, because this offering and the next offering, the next two offerings, we're not told that they have to take the rest of the body, the head, the legs, the entrails, all that, and we're not told they have to take it out and burn it. No, we're not told what to do with it. And so what we will assume happens here is, because the priest is not involved in this sin offering, then the priest can take this meat. And so what would happen most likely is that the priest would offer the pieces to God, and he would keep the other pieces. He would have the other pieces for himself and his family and the priest to eat. And so this is an assumption we would make, because again, before we were strictly told they took the animal out and burned it. These places were not. This one and the next two are not. Now the next two sort of go hand in hand together, in that these are people who are common people. Notice again, beginning in verse 27. If any one of the common people sins unintentionally in doing any one of the things that by the Lord's commandment ought not to be done, and realizes his guilt, or the sin which he has committed is made known to him, he shall bring his offering, a goat, a female without blemish, for his sin which he has committed. And he shall lay his hand on the head of the sin offering, and kill the sin offering in the place of burnt offerings. And the priest shall take some of its blood with his finger, and put it on the horns of the altar of the burnt offering, and pour out all the rest of its blood at the base of the altar. And all of its fat he shall remove, as the fat is removed from the peace offerings. And the priest shall burn it on the altar for a pleasing aroma to the Lord. And the priest shall make atonement for him, and he shall be forgiven. So notice the man, a common person, sins, and they bring their offering, and they bring a female goat. Again, notice you had the bull, the male goat, and the female goat. The female goat is at the bottom of this rank of sacrifices of their cost. And again, because this is a person who is common. He's a regular man. He is not necessarily that example for other people. That's not to say his sin is any less than theirs, but because he's not as much in the public eye as the priest or the ruler, his sacrifice is important, but it's not as valuable. It doesn't have to be, or it doesn't have to cost an animal that's as valuable. And that's because of the example he sets for, or how other people view him. So if this was the case, he'd bring the goat in. Again, he'd bring the goat to the female goat to the front of the tent. He would slit its throat again. They'd drain its blood. The priest would take the blood, just as he did for the ruler, put it on the four corners of the altar of burnt offering, and pour the rest at the base. And then you notice again, we're not told what happens to the rest of the animal. And this again, then the fat is burned, and then the rest of the animal we're not told about. And again, this is an assumption that the rest of the animal goes to the priest. The hide and the animal goes to the priest and his family to use. Now again, you'll notice that when he does this, he shall be forgiven. When he does this, the Lord forgives his sins. That this payment has been made, and he's been atoned. And we see this before we go too far. Now I want to go to this last verse and look at this last little part, verse 32 to following. It says, "And he shall, if he brings a lamb as his offering for a sin offering, he shall bring a female without blemish, and shall lay his hand on the head of the sin offering and kill it for a sin offering at the place where they kill the burnt offering. Then the priest shall take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger, put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and pour out all the rest of the blood at the base of the altar. And all its fat he shall remove, as the fat of the lamb is removed from the sacrifice of peace offering. And the priest shall burn on the altar on top of the Lord's food offering. And the priest shall make atonement for him for the sin which he has committed, and he shall be forgiven." So notice again, the goat is to be brought in. The goat is to be, not the goat. This is a female lamb. If a man doesn't have a female goat, he can bring in a female lamb. And the female lamb is offered on this altar same way. They drain the blood. He takes the blood, puts it at the four corners of the altar burnt offerings, pours the blood at the base of that altar, puts the fat on that altar, and burns it up. Again, the assumption is that when they did this, when they burnt the fat up, the rest of the animal was to go to the priest, the priestly family. This was how they were supported. And so this is the first part of these sin offerings. Now next week, or next lesson, we're going to get into chapter 5. And we're going to talk about what are some unintentional sins. What does he mean here? And then we're going to get into some more details about the sin offering. And then we're going to finally get into the guilt offering. What about the guilt? One who is guilty, and we're going to talk about that, what is involved there. But for tonight, we're going to stop right here. But I want to notice one thing here. Notice this sacrifice, because this is an interesting thing for us. Because this sacrifice is given, and it says again that the sins were forgiven when they were offered. And so some have looked at this and say, well, what's the difference? Why does the New Testament make such an emphasis about the forgiveness of Christ versus the forgiveness of these blood of bulls and goats? Well, the Hebrew writer will tell us that the blood of bulls and goats is only effective so far. It can remove sin, but it can't remove sin forward. And this is what I mean by that. And this is the same thing as parallel with in John's baptism, is that there is a forgiveness of sins that's given in the Bible, especially in these sacrifices in the baptism of John, that is for past sins. That is for sins that have committed, that you have acknowledged you've committed, and you've offered as sacrifice. The difference between God and the forgiveness, or Jesus and his forgiveness we get, is that when we're baptized, we're not only forgiven for sins in the past, we're also forgiven for sins in the future. As John will tell us in 1 John 1, as long as we walk in the light, he is in the light, his blood continually cleanses us. Meaning his blood continually washes us clean. Because you see, every sacrifice, even John's baptism, it forgave sins up to the point that occurred. Any sins beyond that point would have to require a new sacrifice. But with the blood of Christ, it doesn't, as long as that person walks in the light as he is in the light. And when that person stops walking in the light, then something else is needed to be done. In our case, in New Testament, we see that's when the person has to acknowledge they have sinned. They have to admit they've turned away from God and come back to him. Again, what's interesting, again, in the Old Testament, we see there's not a lot of mention about that person who willingly sins against God. It's only those who unintentionally or through ignorance do. And so this is why the Hebrew writer will say the blood of bulls and goats was only effective so far. It can only remove so much sin. It can remove sin up to a point, but it couldn't remove future sin, whereas the blood of Christ could, through the idea of walking in the light as he is in the light, and of that continually cleansing our sin. But that's as far as we're going to go tonight in Leviticus chapter 4. We appreciate you being here with us this evening. Again, remember this Sunday, September the 12th, we will go back to our live in-person worship. We will have a worship-only service at 10 a.m. Then next Wednesday night, we will have our Wednesday night service in person. Then the following Sunday, September the 19th, we will go back to Bible class and worship. September the 19th, we'll go back to 9:30 a.m. worship, our Bible class, and then 10:15 worship. We're doing this again, as we said, because we're having a quarter change with our kid teachers. If you are supposed to be teaching a new quarter and you do not have your material yet, please see Johnny or me or Paula or Carol this week so we can get that to you so that you can be ready for your next quarter. Again, we will continue doing FBI virtual for the time being. We will let you know if there's any changes there. Those videos go out every Tuesday morning. If you have missed one of those, you can go back anytime to our YouTube channel, and they're available there for you to watch. I believe that's all that I have for tonight. I appreciate you joining us, appreciate you being here, and we hope to see you all very soon, and we look forward to seeing you, Lord willing, Sunday morning. Thank you.